Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Geraghty of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We joke about it. Hey, isn't it great that it's Friday? We're really, really glad it's Friday today. Yesterday was exhausting. Somehow, only in Washington can a hearing where there's supposed to be 2 total hours of questioning and 4 opening statements can the process last 9 hours. But that's what happened yesterday, and that's kind of what happens in Washington. We had the emotional testimonies of Dr. Christine Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, of course, the Supreme Court nominee. Jim and I were talking after Ford's testimony. A lot of Republicans were saying she came across certainly as compelling. Credible might be another story. Megyn Kelly and others said there's still a lot of holes in her story. But heading into the afternoon, a lot of people thought this nomination was in doubt. Now it's looking very, very different than that. It looks like confirmation is probably more likely than not. One of the reasons why is Brett Kavanaugh's passionate defense of his character and his record. Here's part of it from Thursday afternoon.
This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. The Constitution gives the Senate an important role in the confirmation process, but you have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. Since my nomination in July, there's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation. Shortly after I was nominated, the Democratic Senate leader said he would, quote, oppose me with everything he's got. A Democratic senator on this committee publicly referred to me as evil. Evil. Think about that word. And said that those who supported me were, quote, complicit in evil.
Perhaps the most emotional moment in his extensive opening statement was explaining how his 10-year-old daughter, during evening prayers, asked the family to pray for Dr. Ford. Then, of course, the questioning started, the Democrats mainly demanding that Kavanaugh order a suspension to the confirmation process and ask the Trump administration to reopen the FBI investigation. Republicans countering by saying, well, if you had brought this forward before they closed the background investigation, this could have been a lot easier. You guys messed up this process in a whole number of ways. The Republicans, after 2 rounds with Kavanaugh, with the sex crimes prosecutor from Arizona, pretty much gave her the rest of the day off. And Lindsey Graham was the first one to do so. And his rant was probably the most memorable of the day. Here's part of it.
Did you meet with Senator Dianne Feinstein on August 20th?
I did meet with Senator Feinstein.
Did you know that her staff had already recommended a lawyer to Dr. Ford?
I did not know that.
Did you know that her and her staff had this allegations for over 20 days?
I did not know that at the time.
If you wanted an FBI investigation, you could have come to us. What you want to do is destroy this guy's life, hold this seat open, and hope you win in 2020. You said that, not me. You've got nothing to apologize for. When you see Sotomayor and Kagan, tell them that Lindsey said hello, because I voted for them. I would never do to them what you've done to this guy. This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. And if you really wanted to know the truth, you sure as hell wouldn't have done what you've done to this guy. Are you a gang rapist?
No.
I cannot imagine what you and your family have gone through. Boy, y'all want power. God, I hope you never get it. I hope the American people can see through this sham. That you knew about it and you held it. You had no intention of protecting Dr. Ford. None. She's as much of a victim as you are.
And that's an important point, too, because of what could have happened confidentially with the committee. We found out yesterday Dr. Ford's lawyers may not have even told her about the option of testifying in private, and with the committee folks coming out to the West Coast. But Jim, a day of big emotion, as we've seen here, and ultimately a day that galvanized a lot of Republicans, it seems.
It did, Greg. And, you and I taped yesterday's edition of the Three Martini Lunch during a break. I don't think anyone would be surprised that you and I both felt like Ford was coming forth in a way that was very compelling, in a way that was impossible to ignore, very tough to believe that this is all being made up or something like that. I think if you watched what she said, you walked away believing that something terrible had happened to her, and she is utterly convinced that Kavanaugh is the guy who did it. But then you watched his denial. And I think every single person who's ever been falsely accused of something, has reacted in that. And we'll talk a bit more about how people characterize his reaction in a little bit. The reaction of Lindsey Graham, I think, also surprised a lot of people. A couple of people who kind of got this impression that he was this nice guy and easygoing and John McCain's best buddy and so eager to work in a bipartisan way, spelled it all out. And it's of note that, again, we are in this situation because of the actions of either Dianne Feinstein and her staff. Now, for what it's worth, the editor of The Intercept said, we did not get the letter from Dianne Feinstein or her staff. Greg, I can do math. There were two people in Congress who had access to this letter. One was Feinstein and her staff. The other was Congresswoman Anna Eshoo and her staff. The publication did not say, and oh, by the way, Anna Eshoo and her staff did not provide the letter either. When there were two people who had access and you only deny that one of them provided it, I can do math. There's one left that you didn't deny and that I strongly suspect was the source. Look, if Dr. Ford wanted to keep her name out of the press, wanted to keep this private, did not want to be put into the situation that she was forced into on Thursday, all Senator Dianne Feinstein had to do was follow established procedure. All she had to, they could have done everything in private. The committee was willing to send people out to California that somehow this wasn't told to Ford. They can do closed hearings. All of these were options to her. And yet somehow reporters start showing up at her workplace and start showing up at her home. That was the responsibility of the leaker. And as I said, I think there's a finger pointing at Anna Eshoo right now, because Occam's razor suggests, possibly the editor of The Intercept is lying. It's possible. But if he's telling the truth, then there's really only one other place this could have come from. And that person made a decision to seriously disrupt and completely overturn the life of Dr. Ford. And for that matter, Brett Kavanaugh. Because now Brett Kavanaugh not just has this, they have the shoddy New Yorker article, and then, of course, they've got Avenatti. And you could see and feel the anger in his comments. It's been really remarkable, Greg, because we've been, for the last 2 to 3 years covering a national political scene and a Republican Party that I think remains deeply divided by President Trump. Some folks totally on board with him, some folks vehemently opposed to him. I think a decent number of folks somewhere in the middle, liking the policies, not liking the Twitter comments and some of the other things he's said and done. But this has galvanized and unified Republicans like few other things, and maybe you wouldn't have expected in this era. But what's interesting is that the Trump side sees their portrayal of a relentlessly partisan, relentlessly nasty, dishonest, and unfair media completely in vivid living color right now. And every Republican who's ever thought, no, we have a responsibility to try to reach across the aisle. We have a responsibility to try to work to lessen the partisan tensions. We have a responsibility to try to find cooperation. That really looks like a sucker's bet right now. You really look foolish if you want to see if you can find a way to work with the Dianne Feinsteins of the world, because they have demonstrated they do not care about anything in pursuit of their power. Maybe not every single Democrat, but certainly enough of them will decide to act like circus showmen in situations like this. A responsible political party would not let anybody like Michael Avenatti come within 100 yards of any position of responsibility. And yet they embraced his charges from the very beginning, including Dianne Feinstein talking about all three women. And if I'm Ford, I don't want to be lumped in with that. Anyway, that's how yesterday was. I think it really galvanized Republicans. As of this recording, Jeff Flake said that he is a yes. He will vote to confirm Kavanaugh. Bit of a surprise. Joe Donnelly, the Democrat from Indiana, says he is a no. Now, he's in a tough re-election race. He had been looking pretty good against Mike Braun. I think he's going to have a much tougher time now. This will galvanize the Democrats in his states, but it will galvanize the Republicans, and Indiana's a pretty right-leaning state. In fact, I'd kind of say if Mike Braun can't beat Joe Donnelly in circumstances like this, I don't know if he could have ever beaten him. So we'll see how that shakes out, Greg, but big ramifications of what's happening today, and I think you've got a very unified Republican Party.
Yes, amazingly so. And it was interesting how a lot of the Democrats, when the hearings got out, and a lot of folks in the media, too, said, well, the Republicans talked all about process. They never actually talked about the evidence. Well, there's a good reason for that, Jim. because other than her testimony, there is no evidence. And so it's kind of hard to ask a lot of things of Brett Kavanaugh about evidence of something he denies ever knowing anything about, much less being the perpetrator of. So anyway, that didn't stop the press from criticizing Brett Kavanaugh in a number of ways. He was angry and he was partisan, is what they said, because he was defending himself from, charges of gang rape and being upset over the fact that his children and wife were the subject of death threats. Sacramento Bee, a crying Brett Kavanaugh. This is what white male privilege looks like. Ruth Marcus, Washington Post. Angry Brett Kavanaugh is not a good look. Doesn't seem like a very smart approach to me. Conservative, in quotation marks, Jen Rubin, Washington Post. You know who is unnerved by this? Senator Collins, who never saw this side of him, thought he was a mild-mannered guy and now sees his explosive anger. But the winner for absurd take, Cynthia Oxney, legal analyst, MSNBC.
Well, I thought it was a temper tantrum. I mean, he wants to be on the Supreme Court, and he's not going to be. And he has, in fact, it has been human carnage. He has been humiliated. And he's angry. And you get the feel that you have a feeling for what he's like when he is, as his roommate from Yale described him, when he drank, that he could be an angry and belligerent drunk.
So if you're upset that your family is being targeted with death threats, it means that you're probably an angry drunk. Jim, you're a mild-mannered guy. I've seen you get into some pretty interesting Twitter fights over time where people accusing you of things you didn't say or didn't even read the article. I can only imagine how you would respond, and I can barely imagine how I would respond if someone targeted my family for death and accused me of being a rapist.
And we all know if he had somehow managed to not seem angry after being accused of organizing gang rapes, then the argument would be, of course he's guilty. Have you ever seen a man so flat and robotic? Clearly there's no passion to his denial. Clearly he's trying to hide a guilty conscience. He did it, et cetera, et cetera. This is what so much of this has gone on, has been this damned if you do, damned if you don't. There is no right answer. Kobayashi Maru no-win situation where any reaction you give is considered further evidence of your guilt. This is how you get witch trials. This is how you get the Inquisition. Well, if your body sinks to the bottom of the river, you weren't a witch, and I guess you're innocent, except now you're drowned. So, sorry about that. At least your name is cleared, even though you've drowned to death. This is why, oh, by the way, when the law attempts to investigate crimes like this, they look for evidence. And I said very early in this process, the more you start seeing people going away from the specifics of this accusation and this particular allegation, and the more they get into issues of culture, about prep school boy culture and white male culture and frat boy culture and all that kind of, the more they want to say, well, let's not look at this particular guy. Let's zoom out and look at all of these men who face this description. And if you've had a bad experience with a prep school guy or with a frat guy, or some other white male, well, clearly the guilt that you're certain of in this circumstance should apply to Brett Kavanaugh. Like, that is asinine, dangerous thinking. And instead of people saying, no, you really shouldn't do this. This is not what we use in courts of law. Memories are not always 100% reliable. When you got a sexual assault case, you really love to have DNA evidence. You really love to have forensic evidence, fingerprints, scratches, DNA under the fingernails, all that kind of stuff, which helps prove things beyond one person's word against another. And it's been fascinating to watch how many, not just people in the Democratic Party, but in the media, sought as quickly as possible to veer away from it, and then decided to try to claim that Kavanaugh's outrage at an accusation that he insists is false and that his family is paying the price for. The fact that he's angry indicates is somehow further evidence of his guilt, demonstrates how much this is a situation which they have come to the conclusion he was guilty from the moment they heard this accusation, and nothing they encounter will change their mind. I put on Twitter, I was like, look, Kavanaugh foes, if there was an FBI investigation and the FBI comes back and said, we found no additional evidence, we can find no evidence to justify the allegations against Kavanaugh, would you declare him innocent? Not merely that it's not proven, but that it's innocent. And not a single person I've encountered so far said yes. There's been a lot of, Jim, well, let's have that then. Let's see. This is a bet. They're convinced that the FBI would find something. And let me point out, Kavanaugh himself said at the hearing yesterday, he's welcomed that by the committee, by the FBI, by the Montgomery County Police. Anybody you want to put on there to investigate, he is confident that investigation will exonerate him. Now, I don't think that's a good reason to delay this. If we had witnesses who were corroborating the account of Ms. Ford, this would be a very different conversation. But right now we don't. Right now it's just her word. And if people had pointed out, there are certain elements of what happened that night that she just doesn't remember. But if after he's confirmed, people still want to do an investigation, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and let's do this. Let's have the FBI investigate this. Don't have Peter Strzok do it. And let them see what they see. Let them take as much time as they need. They might come with their conclude their investigation before the election. They might conclude their investigation after the election. But if, God forbid, they come forth and say, actually, yeah, we did find some evidence, Brett Kavanaugh can resign. Brett Kavanaugh can be impeached from the court. We could correct this if it does turn out to be an injustice. But at this point, I don't think there's any evidence to suggest this is an injustice. So that's where things stand. My suspicion is, though, is that even in that set of circumstances where the FBI came back and said, nope, we didn't find anything, most of his critics would not say, okay, he's innocent, he's been wrongfully accused. They would insist that, Trump's FBI hid the evidence, yada, yada, yada. So in a circumstance so marked by bad faith, you cannot say this is a good faith claim for a more thorough investigation.
Jim, let's move on to our final martini, our crazy martini. And hypocrisy is, of course, in large supply here in Washington. But we got a fascinating dose of it yesterday in the second half of the hearing when Judge Kavanaugh was answering questions from senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee, one of them being Connecticut's Dick Blumenthal, who started his line of questioning with this.
As a federal judge, you're aware of the jury instruction, falsus in unibus, falsus in omnibus, are you not? You're aware of that jury instruction?
Yeah, I am.
You know what it means?
You can translate it for me, Senator. You can do it better than I can.
False in one thing, false in everything, meaning in jury instructions that some of us as prosecutors have heard many times, is told a jury that they can disbelieve a witness if they find him to be false in one thing. So the core of why we're here today really is credibility.
And so some of you might be wondering, well, Jim and Greg, he's just going over a legal concept. Why is that the crazy martini? Well, when Dick Blumenthal decides that he's the paragon of credibility, that becomes crazy because it was exposed, I believe, during his first run for the U.S. Senate.
2010, yep.
Yeah, that he said for years, perhaps decades, that he had served in Vietnam, not in the Vietnam era in the service, but in Vietnam. And then it was exposed that he never had. So if credibility is what we want to argue, Dick Blumenthal is not the one you want making the case.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a hard time believing that he accidentally misspoke over and over again on the record, leaving the impression that he fought in Vietnam when he did not. Greg, I could say a lot of nasty things about the senator from Connecticut, but it's towards the end of the week. I want to end on a high note. So Dick Blumenthal is accurately named.
Wow. So, yeah, we should have a committee vote this afternoon. As you said, Flake's a yes, meaning that Kavanaugh should pass committee. Procedural vote tomorrow. Final vote probably on Tuesday. Don't expect any lessening of the intensity on the left. Jeff Flake's already been cornered in an elevator after announcing he'd vote yes. Who knows what will happen between now and Tuesday. But, Jim, we're worn out. Get some rest this weekend, and we'll talk to you on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.